There's an uncomfortable truth making its way through the building right now, and people around the league are starting to acknowledge it quietly. The Lakers aren't just battling opponents. They're battling a financial structure that's closing in on them. Right now, LeBron James and Luka Doncic account for roughly 64% of the entire payroll. That's not just expensive, that's restrictive, in a way this league has never really seen before. Because under the current rules, once you cross that second apron line, it's not about how much you're willing to spend anymore. It's about what you're no longer allowed to do. And this is where things shift. This isn't the old NBA where ownership could just pay the tax and fix holes on the fly. That version of the Lakers, the one that could reload mid-season and patch weaknesses with experienced veterans, doesn't exist under this system. This version is locked in. No mid-level exception, no flexibility in trades, no buyout market help. It's not just expensive, it's restrictive to the point of paralysis. So when people look at the standings and wonder why a team with two generational playmakers isn't dominating, they're missing the real story. This roster wasn't built to absorb setbacks. It was built on the assumption that everything would go right. Health, performance, availability, all of it. And once one piece shifts, the entire structure starts to feel it. Right, Lake Show forever, if you can see what's really happening behind the scenes. Because this goes way beyond wins and losses. Now layer in the reality that Luka has been dealing with a recurring hamstring issue. This isn't just about missing a star on the court. This is about $50 million sitting inactive while the rest of the roster has no mechanism to compensate for it. In today's cap system, injured money doesn't get replaced. It just creates a void. And that void is falling directly on LeBron. At this stage of his career, he was never supposed to carry this kind of nightly burden again. The plan was balance, shared creation, managed minutes. That plan is gone right now. Every extra stretch he's forced to play isn't just about this game. It's a risk that echoes into the rest of the season. You can see it in the rotations. Players who should be deep in the bench are suddenly playing meaningful minutes, not because they earned it over time, but because there are no alternatives. And in a league this deep, that gap shows up quickly. Defensive coverages break down. Spacing tightens. The offense starts to stall the moment the main creators sit. Opposing teams understand this. They're not trying to stop LeBron or Luka for 48 minutes. They're targeting the moments in between. They're waiting for those stretches where the structure weakens, and that's where games are being decided. And internally, there's awareness of all this. This isn't being ignored. The front office knows exactly what this roster is dealing with. But the issue isn't recognition, it's options. Because under these rules, there aren't many. If you've been watching closely and feel like this team is one break away from flipping the narrative, right, La still believes, because that tension is building. What makes this even heavier is the long-term angle. Staying above that second apron doesn't just hurt you now. It starts affecting your future assets. Draft picks can get frozen. Flexibility disappears year after year. It's not just a tight window, it's a narrowing path. And that's why this moment feels bigger than just a rough stretch. This isn't just about form or rhythm. It's about whether this entire approach can survive under the current system. Because on some nights, you still see flashes of exactly why this was supposed to work. The control, the IQ, the ability to dictate the game, it's all there. But sustaining that across a full rotation, across a full season, under these constraints, that's where the real test begins. And there are people around the league watching very closely right now. Because what happens next with this Lakers team might define how franchises approach star building for years to come. And what's coming in the next stretch of games might finally answer whether this is a temporary strain or something much deeper that this team won't be able to escape from. What's starting to surface now is something even more subtle, and it's happening possession by possession. When the game slows down, when defenses get set and force execution, the lack of balance becomes impossible to hide. You're seeing stretches where everything depends on one decision-maker, one read, one creation. And in today's league, that kind of dependency gets exposed over time. If you want daily Lakers updates and don't want to miss the next big move, subscribe to the channel right now. There's also a psychological layer building inside that locker room. When players know there's no reinforcement coming, no mid-season adjustment, no external help, the margin for confidence gets thinner. Every mistake feels heavier. Every missed rotation, every rushed possession, it carries more weight because there's no safety net behind it. And you can feel how opponents are approaching these matchups now. There's patience in how they play against Los Angeles. They absorb the pressure early, stay within reach, and wait for the rotations to shift. Once that second unit hits the floor, the tone of the game changes. It's not about dominance, it's about timing. And that timing has been working against the Lakers more often than not. Comment, never count out the Lake Show. If you've seen enough of this franchise to know that momentum can flip when it matters most. Another detail that doesn't show up immediately is how spacing has tightened across different lineups. Without consistent secondary creation, defenses collapse faster, help comes earlier, and shooters aren't getting the same clean looks. That ripple effect slows everything down. What used to be natural flow now feels forced in certain stretches. And defensively, the wear is visible. When key players are carrying extended minutes, the rotations lose sharpness. Closeouts get a step slower. Communication hesitates just enough for opponents to take advantage. These aren't dramatic breakdowns. They're small cracks that keep repeating until they shift entire quarters. There's also the reality of asset limitation. With future flexibility tied up and draft capital restricted, the usual pathways to correction just aren't there. This team isn't one move away in the traditional sense because the mechanisms to make that move have been stripped away by design. If you're following this closely, this is exactly the kind of moment where you want to stay locked in with every update, because what happens next won't just be another headline. It could redefine how this entire situation unfolds. Make sure you're subscribed right now, because the next few developments might come fast, and missing them means missing the full picture as it shifts in real time. And inside the organization, there's a growing understanding that the next stretch isn't just about stacking wins. It's about proving sustainability. Can this group hold structure when the pressure rises again? Can they maintain identity when the margin disappears completely? Because the truth is, the league has already adjusted to them. The question now is whether the Lakers can respond, or if they're about to face a stretch that forces even tougher decisions behind the scenes. And this is where things start to feel even more delicate, because the conversation internally is no longer just about performance. It's about endurance. How long can this version of the roster hold up under this kind of strain before something gives? There's a growing sense that every game is pulling a little more out of the core than originally planned, not in a dramatic way, but in those small, cumulative moments that add up over weeks. Extra possessions, extended minutes, tougher defensive assignments, it all stacks. And when your entire structure leans heavily on a limited number of players, that accumulation becomes impossible to ignore. You can also see how the rhythm of the offense changes depending on who's available. When everything is aligned, the ball moves with purpose. But when adjustments are forced, the flow becomes predictable. Defenses read it earlier, rotate faster, and suddenly, those passing lanes that once looked wide open start to close just a fraction sooner. Right? Lakers pride, if you've been through enough seasons, to recognize when this team is being tested in ways that don't show up in headlines. What's interesting is how the younger pieces are being pushed into roles that accelerate their development, but also expose their limitations. These are players who would normally grow in controlled environments, learning through smaller moments. Instead, they're being asked to contribute in high-leverage situations against seasoned competition that doesn't miss those opportunities. And that creates a very specific type of tension, because while growth is happening, it's happening under pressure that doesn't allow for mistakes. There's no buffer, no gradual adjustment. It's immediate and it's constant. Meanwhile, the front office is operating in a space where patience and urgency are colliding. They understand the long-term implications of every decision, but they're also fully aware of the expectations tied to this franchise. In Los Angeles, timelines don't stretch comfortably. They tighten. If you're following all of this closely, now is the moment to stay fully connected, because the next updates won't come with warnings. Hit subscribe and stay locked in, because what's about to unfold could shift the direction of this team faster than most expect. And as the schedule continues to demand more, one question keeps circling quietly behind the scenes. Is this roster built to absorb what's coming next, or is it being stretched to a point where recovery becomes harder with each passing game? Because once that line is crossed, lost, the conversation changes again. And not in a way this franchise is used to accepting. If you're part of Lakers Nation and you want to follow every chapter of this team's story, subscribe now. And there's one last layer to all of this that can't be ignored. Timing. Not just who's available, but when they're available. Because in a structure this tight, there's no room for delays, no space for gradual returns. Everything has to click almost immediately. You can feel that urgency building. Not publicly, not in statements, but in how decisions are being made, in how rotations are tightening, in how every possession starts to carry a little more weight. Comment championship standard if you believe this franchise should always rise when expectations peak, because the next stretch won't just test talent. It will reveal whether this version of the Lakers can actually hold together when it matters most. Stay subscribed and locked in right now, because the next update could change everything around this team faster than anyone expects.